Hello, guys and gals, me Mutahar, and today we're going to be talking about the Kids Online Safety Act. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is a piece of law that I was reading for the last few days, honestly, the last few weeks, really, but in the last few days, things have really ramped up. There's been hearings about it, talks over the town, and it seems like every side of the aisle is getting behind the Kids Online Safety Act. Now, on the surface level, it sounds like a pretty good act. If you read about it, it says it's a bipartisan bill aiming to protect children online. Now, obviously, when it comes to the government, anytime I hear the words, oh, think of the children, or we got to stop evil criminals and terrorists or something like that. And anytime that kind of phraseology gets mixed in and the internet and computers and your personal privacy, it oftentimes, I feel, is used as a smokescreen to censor the internet or potentially limit people's access into certain parts of the internet. Now, this is designed for protecting children. And I want to start off by saying I made tons of content where I talk about actual dangers on the internet. So I am all for protecting children 100%. But it's time to see if this is an actual situation that's designed to protect kids, or is it a smokescreen for the government to use it to basically limit a lot of our access over the internet that we know and love. So the reason why people are talking about it is big companies like Microsoft, X, Meta have actually jumped in a hearing and actually have shown their support for such a bill, okay? So for instance, if you're reading on like many of these articles, TechCrunch over here says, at least when it comes to the ex-CEO, that's formerly known as Twitter, Senator, we support KOSA and will continue to make sure it accelerates and make sure to continue to offer community for teens that are seeking that voice. So she even says, we support the Kids Online Safety Act and will work to preserve freedom of speech for all groups, right? Now, of course, there were some actual groups, for instance, Meta, Discord, TikTok, basically demurring, pointing to groups that have criticized the bill while saying they support some aspects of it. Mark Zuckerberg, who's agreeing with the basic spirit of the bill while declining to endorse it. So obviously this is a pretty hot button issue for a lot of these big tech guys. And when you start to mention things like freedom of speech, this is a pretty important aspect. If you don't live in the United States, one of the cornerstone amendments, the laws, the principles of their government is freedom of speech. And it's the ability for people to say whatever they want, provided it's not, violent in nature or anything of that sort. There are exceptions to free speech, but in general, the government allows you to say whatever you want, and if some people don't like it, well, tough shit. They can kick sand and call it a day. It's a pretty important law, one that I absolutely believe in, and I think should be a standard across numerous countries across the world. Unfortunately, we don't live in that kind of utopia. That also said, with the internet, there are plenty of websites that can be dangerous for children, right? Like, I would say that a lot of social media services, sites that allow kids to talk to random people on the internet, especially when you have minors intermingling with adults, that can be quite dangerous. So this is why laws are now being created so we can at least allow children some form of protections when it comes to dealing with social media services on the internet. So when I actually saw that a bunch of these companies were supporting them, I thought to myself, there's two really good reasons why a company like Microsoft or big tech would support the government in a bill that actually, pretty much puts a lot of requirements on them to police their service. For one, this is the big word. This is the real world, okay? Big companies like Microsoft, in order to stay big, are going to have to play ball with the government, okay? Sometimes you can say no to the government, but if you say no too much, well, then eventually they're going to start putting pressures on you, whether it be regulatory, whether it be looking into various other things you do behind the scenes. They might even try to break you up. But if you play ball, you'll get to keep your kingdom and call it a day. That's one of the theories I personally have. The other big reality of this is, in order for the government to actually enforce this, there's going to be a requirement of you potentially giving up your personal information to let the government know that you're not a kid. Now, this is where the real meat and crux is going into it. For a lot of these big companies, separating between minor and adult is still a big issue. So by passing off the responsibility to the federal government, the states, is something that I think any tech company is okay with. It allows them, in my opinion, to push their targeted advertisements towards their actual markets easier, and it takes a lot of the responsibility of separating children and adults off of them. If the government says they're going to take care of it for you, let them take care of it. I think in a normal world, anybody is willing to pass off as much responsibility as they can, especially when it comes to making sure children are using a service that they shouldn't or should use. All right, that's the two real theories that I'm kind of thinking of. Now, the reason why I'm looking into this, again, very carefully is not just from a freedom of speech angle, but also from an enforcement angle. Obviously, a bill like this exists so that, kids can be protected from, online dangers. And how do you identify if you're a kid or not? Well, there's got to be an age verification system. So in this situation, I want to look at another law recently, and it's not just this state, Utah, but there are laws where they want porn websites, adult websites, to start verifying users' ages. So again, when you look into some of these laws in specific, and this is from the Utah State Legislature, when it regards to online adult websites and their viewing age requirements. So inside over here, they define things like the commercial entity, which is the organization, that is responsible for creating some of these adult websites. Then you've got the digitized identification card, meaning a data file available on any mobile device which has connectivity to the internet through a state-approved application that allows the mobile device to download the data file from a state agency, or an authorized agent of the state, could be a third party that serves as the, stopgap, the tech stopgap for agencies that maybe aren't as mature or, financed as, other big states, that contain all the data elements visible on the face or back of a license or identification card that displays the current status of the license or identification card. So again, the whole point here is for accessing some of these adult websites, the state has jumped in and said, if you're going to access a website that shows you adult content, you should be providing an identification card, okay? So this leads up to an issue, right? For instance, some people have brought up the idea of freedom of speech where, even if you're not a kid, some people may not have identification and you are limiting access for that resource to people that just don't have digital identification or any real world identification. The other big thing is, why should it be a situation where you have to give up your anonymity to access any form of content on the internet? Look, when you're giving up your identification, you are giving up a piece of your anonymity in order to prove that you can access a website. Now, for an adult website, it sounds novel. Obviously, you don't want a child to be accessing adult content on the internet. I agree. But when you mention the idea of ID cards, driver's licenses, the issue that comes out is the anonymity of people using that website gets thrown out into the window. Now, sure, there could be anonymous ways. Maybe the state could make sure that private companies never have access to a driver's license. Maybe just like a quick verification in the middle to say, yeah, this user is accessing an adult website. We've confirmed it. We're the state. Let them in. But at the end of the day, who's to say in that third party, if they hire him, that something doesn't get hacked in the middle? A whole repository of information doesn't get sent out? Who's to say that people searching for an adult piece of content aren't attributed to a specific ID address? There are a lot of actual privacy concerns that I and millions of others raise. And to give you an idea, this is part of Utah protecting minors online. And look, I am all for protecting minors. What they've actually said is they're working, at least for them, in around March 1st, 2024, they've basically said social media companies must verify the age of a Utah adult seeking to maintain or open a social media account. So if you're using something like Twitter, Facebook, whatever, in the state of Utah, you have to provide actual age verification that you can use that account. And let's say that you're under 18 years of age. You got to get the consent of a parent or guardian. Allow the parent or guardian full access to the child's account. And again, people have said maybe this is something that encroaches on the child's privacy. And, there's multiple different schools of parenting thought around it. I'm not a parent. I'm not jumping into that. Create a default curfew setting that blocks overnight access to minor accounts. So from 10:30 p.m. to 6:30, you can't access situations you can access social media services. Protecting minor accounts from unapproved direct messaging. That is something I am totally okay with. I don't think that anybody should be messaging them. I feel like having a situation where minors and adults co-mix together You should absolutely not allow children to have unapproved direct messaging. Block minor accounts from search results. So if your child is searching for whatever term, right, whether it be adult videos or something that maybe the parent or even the state can set, protect them from even accessing that content to begin with. And again, they say that the social media companies cannot collect a minor's data, they cannot target minor social media account for advertising, and cannot target their social media accounts with addictive designs or features. So this is something that I am totally cool with. I actually think these last 3 points are very important. And this is where this bill really dives into. So if you read up the actual bill over here, and this was reported to the Senate literally the end of last year. The bill sets out requirements to protect minors from online harms. The requirement applies to covered platforms, which are applications or services, so social networks, that connect to the internet and are likely to be used by minors. So YouTube. You got sites like Twitch, you've got sites like Twitter, you've got sites like Facebook, where an age bracket of 13 to 18 can go in. Now, generally, for most social media services, I believe they don't even allow anybody under the age of 13. And that's, I believe that's a standard, correct me if I'm wrong, but 13 to 18, minor ages. The bill exempts internet service providers. So again, your internet service company like AT&T, like Verizon. Email services, okay, so Hotmail, Outlook, Gmail, whatever. Educational institutions like primary schools, middle schools, high schools, universities, so on and so forth, and other specified entities from the requirement. So covered platforms must take reasonable measures in the design and operation of products or services used by minors to prevent and mitigate certain harms that may arise from that use. So things like them being exploited, from groomers or, potentially online bullying, which is all really important stuff. Look, when I was a kid, the internet wasn't like the thing everyone was using or everyone had. I guess that's a bad way to put it. Things like smartphones and social media accounts weren't necessarily everywhere. I didn't have a cell phone until very late in high school. And that is a phone that didn't even have like proper internet access to that. Nowadays, my aunt's kids who have had a cell phone, a smartphone from their mother since the age of 11 and 12, I don't personally agree with it, but I get it. We live in a digital world now. Every kid has a smartphone. Parents hand off their tablets to their kids, which is something we're definitely going to address, but we live in a different world, okay? Kids are going to have access to social media services on a younger and younger level. So there's got to be some laws that are out there to help stop some of the most negative aspects of social media affecting their mental health. Additionally, covered platforms must provide minors with certain safeguards, such as a setting that restricts access to minors' personal data. And from what I heard, they basically put the privacy settings to max, which I agree with. And of course, parents and guardians having tools where they can supervise minors, which is important, right? And then, of course, covered platforms must also disclose specified information, including details regarding the use of personalized recommendation systems and advertising to minors. So for everybody that doesn't know, every time you browse your Twitter feed, your Facebook feed, your YouTube feed, all of it is catered on a recommendations algorithm that is centered to you. So when you browse through YouTube and you see the videos on the right-hand side, that's all catered for you. And YouTube designs it so you can constantly use their service. So when you're done watching a video from your favorite content creator, YouTube system knows exactly the type of video you want to watch right after, and it'll autoplay you and get you stuck in a loop. That's how social media companies operate. They want you to stay longer, so you watch more ads, you use more of their products, and you don't go to the competition. Then you allow parents, guardians, minors, and schools to report certain harms. So there is an involvement with parents in regards to this. Refrain from facilitating advertisement of age-related products. So you can't be advertising tobacco, booze, gambling to minors, which makes sense. Annually report on foreseeable risks of harm to minors from using the platform. So a lot of the actual, I guess you could say responsibility is put on the social media services and the ability to provide tools for parents. All of this sounds great so far. I'm actually not against a lot of this. So then they say that the enforcement is done through the FTC and the states, and by states they mean the attorney generals for all 51 states of the United States. Further, the bill requires the commission to seek the contract with the National Academy of Sciences to study the risks of harms, but also it establishes a council on how to implement the bills, guidance for market and product research, and an evaluation for options to verify a user's age. Now, I read through the bill, a lot of it that was amended, and they actually mentioned other things in here. For instance, they mentioned video games, so an online video game, which includes the allowing users to create and upload content, engage in microtransactions within the game, or communicate with other users. So if you're a gaming company that has made products like Genshin Impact, like Call of Duty, games where a lot of money is made through selling, skins and various pieces of microtransaction content, you might be looked at. And if you're a minor playing on their video games, you may basically be forced to touch down your advertising a little bit and maybe get rid of your dark patterns. So we're going through a lot of stuff, but again, this is the law. It's very complicated and wild. So in duty of care, according to this law, the prevention of harms to minor, a covered platform shall take reasonable measures in the design and operation of any product, service, or feature that the covered platform knows is used by minors. So consistent with evidence-informed medical information, which again is mostly related to like transgender healthcare and stuff like that, from what I've read and usually the argument that people have, which when you leave this up to the states, I feel like each and every single state, which has, again, their own politics, their own version of understanding even things like mental health disorders like anxiety, depression, eating disorders, when you leave it up for the states to decide, what's to say that the state of Texas is going to allow different information than, say, the state of California, where like people have varying, or at least a state has varying different like political beliefs. Again, you've got things like patterns that use or indicate or encourage addiction-like behaviors, physical violence, online bullying, exploitation, promotion or marketing of narcotic drugs. So a lot of these situations I agree with. Some of this stuff may be left intentionally vague for states to decide. And this is where I get into the basic finale of it, right? So one of the important parts is, how do we identify if you're a minor or not? You're going to have some level of age verification. And there was an interesting study done by CNIL in France, where they talked about how online age verification is an incredibly complex issue. And there's multiple different types of age verification. One of them is age verification through payment cards. So for instance, if you go to like OnlyFans and you put your credit card in, that's the age verification, because they're basically checking, hey, this person is old enough for a credit card. They should probably be old enough to access OnlyFans sites if they're free or paid. And while it seems like a pretty good system, one that I think could even somewhat, protect even, someone's, anonymity to an extent when you're dealing with a bank and whatnot, it's not foolproof either. I don't know if it necessarily stops children from using prepaid credit cards to access age-gated materials. But then again, I haven't truly played with OF or anything like that, so I'm not entirely sure. Correct me if I'm wrong. You've got age verification through estimates based on facial analysis. So basically what happens is you point, your Face ID, your camera to your face, and an AI basically determines if you're old enough to access. Obviously, the problem is, who knows if this is proper? Who knows if the person if the person looks young, like super young, I mean, that could be an issue. If they look super old, but they're not, that can also be an issue. And the problem is, when you're dealing with third-party agencies that are analyzing your face through AI, are you worried about your information potentially being leaked there? Are you worried about your information being stored on a server and then somebody getting access to it and finding out just who's accessing what porn sites? That's an issue itself too. And then you've got age verification through the identity documentation. So you provide your driver's ID, your passport, something of that nature. And I don't think it's absolutely okay for any social media company or any adult company, even if it's working with the state, to be looking at or getting some access to your private information. Look, at the end of the day, the internet's supposed to be the last bastion of true, proper freedom. The moment we start needing ID cards to access websites, even if they're adult or not, even if they're just social media services, that is an issue that I think needs to be talked about and addressed properly. I don't really agree with the government going in and asking for age verification. And even according to this bill, they are putting together an organization to figure out how to do that. I just don't know if there's a way for the government to properly do it. Now, the EFF, who's basically been at the forefront of talking about how this bill can be dangerous to all of our rights online, have mentioned various situations where this bill still requires the filtering and blocking of legal protected free speech. It's got situations where the Attorney General, the state, can decide what they believe is content dangerous for certain people. So like I said earlier, the state of California may believe certain things are different for people who are in like the state of Texas or the state of Delaware or the state of New York, so on and so forth. Now, the thing that I have to talk about is enforcement, okay? How is it that you're going to enforce something like this when you've got things like VPN softwares? Imagine if, like, the state of Texas decided to censor speech for minors. What's stopping a minor from using a VPN, even a free VPN? There's plenty of them that exist out there. Can use a free VPN to VPN to another country even, and then access that information too. There are so many things that are being put into this that can easily be circumvented by anybody slightly savvy at any tech. And all this does is put more restrictions and friction for the average person on the internet. And the moment, again, like I said, giving up your ID to access certain websites is pretty hazy to me, and it's not something I could ever really get behind. That is to say, I do get behind protecting children on the internet. I understand 100% how dangerous the online world can be for kids. But I don't think giving up privacy is necessarily the way to go about it. Look, at the end of the day, I think what's happening over here is you've got the state, you've got big tech, and you've got parents all trying to throw away responsibility. When in reality, the responsibility for your child falls onto you, the parent. We live in a world where every parent can give their kid a gaming console, an iPad, an iPhone, and just pretend that is a replacement. When in reality, when you give your children access to cell phones or tablets, I'm not saying keep them away from it. Obviously, we live in a world where every kid is gonna have to have access to a cell phone, laptop, whatever. But it is your responsibility as a parent to monitor what your kids are doing online. Look, as a kid, my parents always told me never to get into the fucking free candy van and never to talk to the weird dude on the internet. And I think I was raised right enough, okay? I stayed away from the free candy van and I never talked to anybody showing their cock on PictoChat. And I think most parents can jump in and try to do the same themselves. I'm not saying there isn't blame with social media companies. What I do agree with this bill is protecting children from these addictive social media like recommendation systems. That needs to stop. Advertising in a deceptive manner, in an addictive manner to children needs to stop. Unauthorized messages from third parties or unauthorized accounts to a minor should be stopped. These are things that should automatically exist for any social media service out there. And for what it's worth, I actually don't think this is the worst bill I've read. It actually addresses a lot of interesting things in regards to children and the advertising that's put towards them, the addictive recommendations engines, and of course it is addressing real problems that kids face online. The only issue that I have, and again, this is for anybody here, is if you are limiting access to certain content, obviously it's meant to protect children from content that they find. There should be a uniform standard, and I don't think it should be left up to each state's attorney general to go to. That also said, my big concern is the age verification. No system is perfect. And if we're at a point where accessing websites on the internet, and I can actually see this going from, adult websites to websites that provide information on topics that some states could consider too emotionally mature for minors, to be a situation where it's going to lock these things off with an ID, and accessing these things will require you to give up a level of your anonymity and privacy. And in an age of today, I don't know if I'm necessarily comfortable with giving up anything, considering how much information gets leaked, how much information gets hacked, and the amount of lists that are being built up for the average person around. Again, this is an era where people are really going to have to start to use like anonymized services, the dark web, a lot of things to make sure that the last bastion of freedom remains the last bastion of freedom. Ultimately, the idea of identifying who is an adult or who isn't puts a really big issue in anonymity for the internet and privacy in general. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. Sorry, it's been a bit of a dry video. This stuff really interests me, and the only way to present it is to get really verbose. So ladies and gentlemen, let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. If you care, let me know. If you don't care, let me know. I am